The air was thick with despair as the last remnants of hope faded into the evening mist. It was the summer of 1847, and a single figure stood alone on the muddy path that wound through the fields of County Clare. His name was Seamus O'Reilly, a farmer who once took pride in his potato harvest, now reduced to a gaunt shadow of his former self. His hands, calloused and trembling, clutched a tattered straw hat, the brim soaked with the relentless rain that fell like tears from the heavens. The smell of damp earth clung to him, mingling with the faint odor of decay that wafted from the fields. Fields that had once been vibrant and alive, now eerily silent, stripped of their bounty. As Seamus gazed out over the sodden ground, his heart clenched. The potato blight had ravaged his crop, leaving behind only blackened stumps where once plump, green tubers thrived. He could hear the distant cries of his children, their voices rising in pitch, punctuated by sobs of hunger echoing through the walls of their small cottage. The haunting sound wrapped around him like a shroud, suffocating, relentless. Each wail was a reminder of the empty bellies that awaited him at home. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a crimson glow that seeped through the clouds, illuminating the despair that lay below. The last rays of light flickered against the sky, a cruel reminder of the brighter days that felt like a distant dream. In this twilight, Seamus felt the weight of the world pressing upon his shoulders, heavy, unforgiving. He turned his gaze toward the horizon, where dark figures emerged, silhouetted against the dying light. A group of men approached, their faces obscured by shadow, yet their intent was clear. They were the local officials, men of authority sent to assess the devastation. As they drew closer, the clatter of hooves echoed behind them, the sound of horses' hooves striking the wet earth, mingling with the low rumble of distant thunder. They were accompanied by a carriage, its wheels heavy with the weight of grim tidings. The officers, stiff in their uniforms, gathered in a semicircle, their murmurs indistinct, yet charged with urgency. Seamus's heart raced, dread coiling within him like a serpent. He had heard whispers of their arrival, of officials tasked with enforcing the poor law, a measure that many believed would bring relief, but which he feared would only deepen the suffering. The leader, a man with a thin mustache and a hawk-like demeanor, stepped forward. His voice cut through the damp air, sharp and unyielding. "We cannot afford to lose any more crops," he proclaimed, his tone laced with a chilling authority. "The land must be worked, even if it means taking from those who have little left." Seamus clenched his fists, the rough fabric of his coat scratching against his skin. It was a threat hidden in the guise of a command. He could sense the tension rising, a palpable current of fear and desperation among the gathered crowd. "Please," Seamus implored, his voice cracking, "we have nothing left to give. Our children are starving." His words hung in the air, fragile and trembling. The officer's expression hardened, as if Seamus's plea was a mere annoyance, a fly buzzing around his ear. "You must comply," he replied coldly, an unwanted smile flickering momentarily. "The law is the law, and we will enforce it." As the men turned to depart, the weight of despair felt unbearable. Seamus stepped forward, desperation clawing at his throat. "This isn't just about the land," he shouted, his voice rising above the soft patter of rain. "It's about our lives. You take our food. You take our future." His words echoed, and for a fleeting moment, a spark of defiance ignited in the eyes of those around him. But it was quickly extinguished, as the officer merely glanced back, his eyes devoid of empathy. The air turned heavy with silence, punctuated only by the distant rumble of thunder. Seamus felt a wave of anger wash over him, a primal instinct to fight for his family, for his home. He grasped the remnants of his courage, every heartbeat a reminder of those he loved. "You will not take what little we have left," he declared, his voice steady, resonating through the stillness like a drumbeat of resolve. But the officer merely scoffed, a cruel smile creeping across his lips. "You will find that resistance is futile," he said, turning away dismissively. The group mounted their horses and began to ride off, leaving Seamus standing alone, his heart pounding in his chest, a tempest of fear and anger swirling within him. He watched as the figures disappeared into the mist, swallowed by the darkness. The rain fell harder now, a relentless cascade that blurred the horizon, matching the tears that threatened to spill from his weary eyes. The air was heavy with the scent of wet soil and rotting crops, a bitter reminder of the devastation that had gripped his homeland. As twilight deepened into night, Seamus turned back toward the cottage, where the cries of his children echoed like a haunting melody, a bittersweet reminder of love and loss intertwined. He felt the cold seep into his bones, a chill that went beyond the weather. It was the chill of despair, the realization that the battle was far from over. But to understand how we got here, in the years leading up to the Great Irish Famine, the sun rose softly over the rolling hills of County Clare, casting a warm golden light across the verdant fields. The air was thick with the scent of earth and life. A rich aroma carried on gentle breezes. Farmers like Seamus O'Reilly, a man of humble stature with calloused hands and a furrowed brow, tended to their modest plots with hope and determination. His small cottage, nestled among the wildflowers and brambles, was a refuge against the harsh realities of life, a sanctuary filled with the laughter of his children and the warmth of a flickering hearth. Yet, beneath this idyllic surface lay a brewing storm, a confluence of social, economic, and political tensions that would soon unravel the very fabric of Irish society. In the mid-19th century, Ireland was a land of stark contrasts. A small, wealthy elite controlled the vast majority of land, while the majority of the population toiled in poverty, their lives dictated by the whims of landlords and the market. The oppressive weight of British rule loomed large, stifling voices that sought justice and equality. It was a time when the struggle for Catholic emancipation, led by the passionate Daniel O'Connell, ignited hope yet left many disillusioned. O'Connell, with his sharp intellect and fiery oratory, became a beacon for those yearning for change. His speeches echoed through the cobbled streets of Dublin, his voice rising above the chatter of the marketplace, where the aroma of baked bread and the sharp tang of salt from the nearby docks mingled in the air. He spoke of rights, of dignity, of a future where Irishmen could stand tall beside their British counterparts. Yet, as fervent as the movement was, many remained trapped in a cycle of despair, their lives consumed by the daily struggle for survival. The Irish population relied heavily on the potato, a crop that had become a staple of their diet, filling bellies, bringing sustenance, and fostering a sense of community. The fields in County Clare, once bursting with vibrant green foliage, were now a patchwork of promise and vulnerability. In the summer, the land hummed with the sounds of labour, the rhythmic shovels striking the earth, the laughter of children playing among the rows, and the distant calls of birds weaving through the warm air. Yet as the days grew longer, a shadow began to creep over the fields, an insidious blight that would turn the vibrant landscape into a desolate wasteland. As Seamus knelt in his fields, the rich black soil clinging to his fingertips, he felt a tremor of unease. The leaves of his beloved potato plants had begun to curl and blacken, a foreboding sign of decay. The once familiar scent of damp earth began to mingle with the acrid smell of rot, a scent that haunted him in the deep recesses of night. He would often lie awake, staring at the thatched roof above him, listening to the low murmur of the wind whispering through the cracks, carrying with it the distant echoes of despair from his neighbours. Each man and woman in the village shared a bond, their lives intertwined like the roots of the very crops they sowed. They gathered at the local market, a bustling hub of life, where the air was thick with the mingling scents of fresh produce and livestock, punctuated by the cries of children darting between stalls. Yet even here, beneath the jovial banter of vendors, a palpable tension lingered, a shared worry that hung like a cloud over the community. Whispers of crop failures and rising rents flitted through the crowd, a grim reminder that their fragile existence was always on the brink. And then came the fateful year of 1845, when the blight struck like a thief in the night. One by one, the potato fields began to fail, the vibrant green giving way to a sickly black. The once healthy plants wilted under the weight of despair, their roots rotting in the ground. The air once filled with the song of life now echoed with a chilling silence, broken only by the murmurs of disbelief and rising fear. Farmers like Seamus began to gather at the local pub, their faces drawn and weary, their laughter replaced by solemn conversation. Meanwhile, in the grand halls of power, the British government remained largely ignorant of the unfolding crisis. Charles Trevelyan, the British Assistant Secretary to the Treasury, was a man of conviction, his heart steeped in the belief of market forces. He saw the famine as a natural consequence of overpopulation, an opportunity for the free market to rectify itself. His policies, masked as aid, often lacked the urgency that the dire situation demanded. From his office, adorned with maps and figures, he viewed the plight of the Irish through a lens of cold calculation, oblivious to the human suffering that echoed outside his door. As the blight spread, the sounds of desperation became more pronounced. The wails of children, once filled with laughter, were now cries of hunger that reverberated through the cottages. The delicate aroma of freshly baked bread was replaced by the stench of decay, a haunting reminder of what was lost. Villagers would gather at the edges of fields, their faces etched with worry, their hands trembling as they dug through the earth, searching for remnants of crops that had once been their lifeline. In the heart of the village, a local official with a thin moustache, often seen adjusting his spectacles, took it upon himself to enforce the poor law. His voice, sharp and commanding, rang through the streets, echoing off the damp stone walls as he delivered grim news of impending inspections. He wielded his authority with an iron fist, his presence instilling fear rather than hope. The villagers felt the weight of his gaze upon them, a reminder that their struggles were not only against nature, but also against a system that turned a blind eye to their plight. As the months dragged on, the once vibrant community began to fracture. Families, once united by shared joys and sorrows, found themselves torn apart by the desperate need to survive. The sound of laughter was gradually replaced by the anguished cries of those facing starvation. Neighbors who had shared meals and stories now turned against one another, rationing scraps and hiding what little food remained. The bonds of kinship that had held firm began to fray, replaced by a gnawing fear of what the next day would bring. Seamus, ever the stalwart figure amidst the chaos, sought solace in the eyes of his children. Their innocent laughter, though fading, still echoed in the corners of his mind, a flickering flame amid encroaching darkness. He would gather them close, wrapping his arms around their frail bodies, whispering stories of resilience and strength. He painted vivid pictures of green fields stretching infinitely, of harvests abundant, and of a time when laughter would once again fill the air. But even as he spoke, the chill of reality seeped deeper into his bones. In the shadow of the blight, the people of Ireland began to awaken to a new consciousness. Their suffering, once endured in silence, began to spark a fire of resistance that would not be easily extinguished. The seeds of nationalism, long buried beneath layers of oppression and despair, began to take root. Men and women who had once accepted their fates as mere victims of circumstance now found their voices rising in unison. They would gather in secret, their eyes gleaming with a fierce determination, whispering of change and liberation. As the winter of 1846 descended upon the land, a harsh wind swept across the fields, biting through the rags that barely clothed the villagers. The air was heavy with the scent of frost, a chilling reminder of their fragile existence. But it was not just the cold that gnawed at their spirits. The sight of empty fields, once bursting with life, now lay barren, a stark reminder of the devastation wrought by the blight. In this bleak landscape, a fragile thread of hope began to weave its way through the hearts of the people. They gathered in the flickering light of candle-lit cottages, sharing stories of resilience and defiance. They spoke of O'Connell's vision, of a united Ireland where the voices of the oppressed would rise above the clamour of tyranny. The warmth of their camaraderie became a balm against the harsh realities they faced, a reminder that together they could weather even the darkest of storms. Yet, as the famine deepened, the gulf between the rich and poor widened further, a chasm that seemed insurmountable. Landlords, distant and detached, continued to reap profits from the land, their laughter echoing through the halls of their grand estates, completely oblivious to the suffering that lay just beyond their manicured gardens. The distant sound of carriages rattling over cobblestones became a bitter reminder of their indifference, a cruel juxtaposition to the quiet desperation that enveloped the villages. As the first signs of spring began to emerge in 1847, The ground lay bare, stripped of the nourishment that had once sustained life. The air was thick with the scent of decay, a reminder of the struggles that lay ahead. Seamus, weary and worn, stood at the edge of his field, his heart heavy with despair. The once familiar landscape now felt foreign, a haunting reminder of dreams unfulfilled. Hope flickered like a candle in the wind, but it was a fight worth fighting. With each passing day, the reality of starvation loomed larger. The sound of empty stomachs echoed through the village, a chorus of anguish that could not be silenced. Families, once proud and self-sufficient, now stood at the precipice of despair, their eyes hollow and their spirits waning. The warmth of community began to dissipate, giving way to distrust and fear. Yet, within this darkness, the human spirit began to rise. The seeds of rebellion were sown, nurtured by the cries of the hungry and the dreams of a better life. The people of Ireland, once silent in their suffering, began to find their voices, and with them, the courage to challenge the very forces that had brought them to their knees. As the sun set over County Clare, casting long shadows across the fields, Seamus O'Reilly stood resolute, a flicker of determination igniting within him. The road ahead was fraught with uncertainty, but he would not stand idly by as his world crumbled. He would fight for his family, for his community, and for a future where laughter would once again fill the air. With the weight of history pressing upon him, he took a deep breath, the chill of the evening air filling his lungs. The night was dark, but in his heart, a spark of hope remained, a promise that the dawn would come again. And with it, perhaps, the chance to reclaim all that had been lost. The early days of 1848 brought a crispness to the air that seemed almost invigorating, a deceptive promise of renewal. The frost clung to the fields, glistening like 1,000 tiny diamonds scattered across the landscape of County Clare. For Seamus O'Reilly, the bitter bite of winter was not just felt in the chill that crept into his bones, but in the realization that his life had been irrevocably altered. The haunting memory of shriveled potato plants still lingered in his mind, their once vibrant green leaves now a distant echo, a reminder of the devastation that had swept through the land. As the sun rose higher in the sky, its rays pierced through the grey clouds, casting a warm glow over the village. Children, bundled in threadbare coats, played in the dirt streets, their laughter ringing out like a sweet melody amidst the pervasive sorrow. Yet, beneath the surface, a current of hope began to stir. The whispers of change filled the air, merging with the scent of smoke from the chimneys, the tang of salt from the nearby coast, and the earthy aroma of wet soil. The people had begun to gather in small groups, their faces a mixture of determination and desperation, their voices low but resolute. In the heart of Dublin, the political landscape was shifting, and Seamus felt the tremors of that change, even from his humble cottage. The name of Daniel O'Connell echoed through the streets, a beacon of hope for many. O'Connell, known as the Liberator, was a man who had devoted his life to the cause of Catholic emancipation. His speeches, filled with passion and conviction, ignited the spirits of the Irish people. They believed that they could rise from the ashes of despair, that they could challenge the oppressive forces that had long held them in thrall. The air crackled with energy as O'Connell's followers gathered for his rallies, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames of torches. The sound of his voice, rich and powerful, resonated through the throngs, urging the people to stand firm, to demand their rights. "We are not slaves, we are men," he would proclaim, his words echoing in the hearts of thousands. They felt the strength of his conviction, a palpable charge that coursed through the crowd like electricity. But with hope came anxiety. The spectre of the famine loomed large, casting a long shadow over their aspirations. The failure of the potato crop had not just robbed them of sustenance, it had exposed the deep fissures in their society. As the winter dragged on, the spectre of starvation crept ever closer. The scent of bread, once a staple of every table, became a distant memory for many. The notion of a better future began to feel like a cruel joke, a mirage shimmering just out of reach. In the warmth of his cottage, Seamus sat at the small wooden table, the surface worn smooth by years of use. He traced the grain with his fingers, seeking solace in its familiarity. His wife Mary moved quietly about the kitchen, her hands deftly preparing what little food they had. The smell of boiling water mingled with the faint scent of herbs, a reminder of the time before the blight, when their larder had been full. She paused, looking at Seamus with concern. The lines of worry etched into her brow deepened, and the weight of their shared struggle hung heavily between them. "Do you think it will ever get better?" she asked softly, her voice barely rising above the crackle of the fire. Seamus met her gaze, the warmth of her presence a balm against the growing chill of uncertainty. He wanted to tell her that hope was on the horizon, that O'Connell's vision of a free Ireland would soon become a reality. But the truth was, he felt the tremors of doubt creeping in, gnawing at the edges of his resolve. Outside, the villagers began to gather, their whispers blending into a low hum that filled the air. They stood shoulder to shoulder, united by a common cause, their eyes glinting with a mixture of fear and determination. The local leaders, once mere figures of authority, now found themselves at the forefront of a movement that sought to challenge the status quo. The air was thick with anticipation as they prepared to march, their hearts beating in time with the rhythm of hope and defiance. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the fields, a sense of urgency permeated the gathering. The flickering flames of torches reflected the fire in their eyes, illuminating the faces of those who had come to listen, to learn, to rise. The smell of burning wood mingled with the cool evening air, creating an intoxicating blend of anticipation and resolve. Seamus joined the throngs, stepping out into the gathering dusk. The murmur of voices swelled around him, a chorus of determination rising against the backdrop of despair. He could feel the warmth of bodies pressing close, the shared breath of a people united in their longing for change. They were not just farmers and labourers. They were dreamers, fighters, and above all, they were survivors. The night air was electric, crackling with a promise of revolution. As O'Connell took to the makeshift platform, the crowd fell silent, their breaths held in anticipation. The firelight flickered against his features, casting shadows that danced across his face. He spoke of resilience, of standing firm against oppression, of the power of unity. His words flowed like the river that coursed through the heart of Ireland, twisting and turning, carving a path toward a brighter future. "In the face of adversity, we must rise," he thundered, his voice cutting through the night like a clarion call. The crowd erupted in cheers, a wave of sound that echoed through the streets, carrying their hopes into the starry sky. Seamus felt the pulse of the moment within him, the rhythm of history unfolding, the very air vibrating with the possibility of change. But as the fervour of the crowd swelled, so too did the undercurrents of trepidation. There were whispers of resistance from those in power, a looming threat that hovered like a dark cloud. The British government, still reeling from the implications of the famine, began to tighten its grip on Ireland. The sound of marching boots echoed in the distance, a reminder that not all voices would be welcomed in the halls of power. The spring of 1848 arrived with a mixture of promise and peril. The fields began to awaken from their winter slumber, the first tendrils of green pushing through the soil, a fragile symbol of hope against the backdrop of despair. Yet the spectre of hunger continued to cast its long shadow, a reminder of the harsh reality that lay just beneath the surface. Seamus tended to what remained of his crops, the earth cool and damp beneath his fingertips. The texture of the soil was both comforting and cruel, a reminder of the bounty that had once flourished. He could feel the weight of expectation pressing down upon him, the collective hopes of his community resting on his shoulders. As he worked, the sounds of nature surrounded him, the gentle rustle of leaves, the distant call of a lark, the soft whisper of the wind through the grass. But the weight of uncertainty was unyielding. Each day brought new challenges, new fears, and the spectre of the past loomed large. Seamus had taken to meeting with his neighbours, their conversations filled with a mix of hope and dread. They spoke of O'Connell's rallies, of the promises of emancipation, and of the struggles that lay ahead. Yet, beneath the surface, a shared understanding began to emerge, a realization that they were not merely waiting for change, they were becoming the architects of it. In the quiet moments, when the sun dipped low in the sky and the world around him faded into twilight, Seamus found himself reflecting on the power of community. The bonds that had formed under the weight of the famine were stronger than any government decree. They were woven together by shared struggle, each thread a testament to their resilience. The sound of laughter from neighbouring cottages drifted through the air, mingling with the earthy scent of the evening dew. It was a reminder of what they were fighting for: a future, a home, a way of life. The momentum of the movement was palpable, the energy of the people swelling like the tide. As they gathered for O'Connell's next rally, the feeling of unity washed over the crowd. Seamus stood among them, shoulder to shoulder with his neighbours, the warmth of their bodies a shield against the encroaching chill. The air was thick with anticipation, every breath a shared commitment to their cause. But as O'Connell spoke, outlining the path forward, Seamus felt a tension in the crowd. The sound of distant drums echoed in the background, a reminder that not all were in favour of this uprising. The British government was preparing to respond. And the stakes were rising. The voices of dissent began to rise as well, the murmurs of those who feared the consequences of standing up against authority. The smell of smoke filled the air, mingling with the scent of earth and sweat. Seamus felt the heat of the moment, the energy of the crowd surging around him. O'Connell's words rang out, urging them to stand firm, to rise against the injustices that had kept them shackled for far too long. The fire in his belly ignited, and for a moment, all doubt faded away. They were part of something greater than themselves, a movement that would reshape the very fabric of their society. But as the night wore on, the tension escalated. The distant sound of marching feet grew louder, and Seamus could sense the unease ripple through the crowd. The hope that had ignited within him began to flicker, a candle in a gathering storm. He exchanged worried glances with his neighbours, their expressions mirroring his own, determination tempered by fear. In the weeks that followed, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. The government, threatened by the rising tide of nationalism, began to tighten the noose. The sound of horses' hooves echoed through the streets, the clanking of metal armour, a chilling reminder of the power that sought to suppress their voices. The smell of smoke and fear hung heavy in the air, a constant reminder of the precariousness of their situation. Seamus found himself caught in the middle of a whirlwind, the events unfolding around him, moving faster than he could comprehend. The rallies continued, but the mood shifted. The voices that had once rung with hope now trembled with apprehension. The community, once bound by a shared purpose, began to splinter under the weight of fear. The sound of dissent grew louder, and the whispers of betrayal hung in the air like a dark cloud. In the quiet moments, as he sat in the dim light of his cottage, Seamus grappled with the shifting tides of his reality. The warmth of Mary beside him, her gentle presence a soothing balm, reminded him of what he fought for. The fabric of their lives was woven together with love and sacrifice, and yet the world outside felt increasingly hostile. As the weeks turned into months, the promise of spring transformed into the harsh reality of summer. The once bountiful fields lay dormant, the earth cracked and parched beneath the unrelenting sun. The hunger that had been a distant spectre now loomed large, casting a long shadow over their lives. The sound of children's laughter turned into cries of despair, the air thick with the stench of desperation. And yet, even in the darkest moments, the spirit of the people refused to be extinguished. They gathered in secret, sharing stories of resilience and solidarity. The flicker of hope remained, a candle burning against the darkness. Seamus stood among them, feeling the warmth of their camaraderie, the strength that came from unity. But as the summer wore on, the reality of their situation became increasingly dire. The government's response, tepid at best, failed to address the growing crisis. The sound of distant protests echoed through the streets, a reminder that the people were not willing to remain silent. The air grew heavy with tension, crackling like a storm about to break. In the midst of it all, O'Connell remained a stalwart figure, his voice rising above the chaos. He called for action, urging the people to rise and demand their rights. The scent of change lingered in the air, a potent reminder that they were on the brink of something monumental. The voices of the oppressed began to rise, a chorus of defiance that resonated through the halls of power. Seamus felt the tide turning, a swell of energy that surged through the crowd. The sound of drums filled the air, a heartbeat that matched the rhythm of their determination. They were more than just farmers and labourers. They were a force to be reckoned with. The fire of revolution burned brightly in their hearts, illuminating the path forward, even as the shadows loomed large. And yet, as the summer sun began to set, casting a golden hue over the fields, Seamus could not shake the feeling that their moment of reckoning was drawing near. The winds of change were howling, and he could sense the storm approaching. The time for action was now, and they would need to rise together, united in their quest for a better future. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land, Seamus felt the weight of history pressing down upon him. The air was thick with anticipation, a reminder that the moments they lived were not merely about survival, they were about legacy. The struggle they faced would shape the very fabric of their society, and he could feel the pulse of destiny resonating through his veins. In that moment, as the last light of day faded into darkness, Seamus knew that their fight was just beginning. The sound of unity thrummed in the air, a promise that they would rise together, no matter the cost. The flicker of hope remained, a guiding light leading them toward a future yet unwritten. And with that, he took a deep breath, ready to face the challenges that lay ahead, knowing that together they could forge a new path in the annals of history. The shadows deepened, but the light within them burned ever brighter. The air in County Clare hung heavy with an ominous stillness, a silence punctuated only by the distant caw of crows circling overhead. The summer sun, once a warm embrace for the land, now cast an unforgiving light on the wilting potato plants, their once vibrant green leaves now a sickly yellow, curling at the edges like the fingers of a dying hand. Seamus O'Reilly stood at the edge of his small plot, the earth beneath his worn boots dry and cracked. His heart raced, a drum echoing the grim truth. This was no mere blight. This was a disaster unfolding before his very eyes. In the days that followed the unsettling discovery of his withered crops, the hunger that gnawed at Seamus's stomach seemed to seep into the very fabric of his life. The familiar sounds of the countryside, the gentle rustle of the wind through the fields, the soft bleating of sheep on the hills, felt discordant now, as if the world itself had turned against him. Each morning he would rise at dawn, the chill of the early light biting at his skin, and wander through his garden, hoping against hope to find signs of life amongst the decaying plants. But day after day, the stark reality only deepened his despair. Mary, with her gentle spirit and tireless hands, tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy. She would hum softly as she worked, her voice blending with the haunting whispers of the wind. But the songs she sang were laced with an undercurrent of sorrow, each note a delicate reminder of the dwindling food stores. The children, their laughter now a distant memory, shuffled about with hollow eyes, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on their small shoulders. The warmth of their home, once filled with cheerful chatter, had transformed into a space heavy with dread. It was in early August of 1847 that the first whispers of real crisis began to emerge from the towns and villages beyond the rolling hills of Clare. People spoke in hushed tones of a growing famine, a word that hung in the air like a death knell. The markets in nearby towns, where once the vibrant colours of fresh produce dazzled the eye, now echoed with the haunting cries of vendors peddling whatever remnants of food they could find. The stench of desperation lingered, a rancid mix of spoiled goods and the sweat of worried brows. As the sun sank lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the land, Seamus gathered with other farmers at the local hall, their faces drawn and weary. The wooden beams of the structure creaked as they settled into their seats, the atmosphere thick with tension. A local official, a man with a thin moustache and a sharp suit, stood at the front, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "We must act now," he declared, his tone laced with urgency. "The government is offering assistance, but we need to organise. We need to show them the gravity of our situation." Seamus listened intently, his heart pounding in his chest. The man outlined plans for a petition, a desperate plea to the British government for help. But a sense of foreboding crept in. He had heard too many promises before, each one like a shadow slipping through his fingers. Days turned into weeks, and the potato blight continued its relentless march, turning the once lush fields into barren wastelands. With each passing day, the hunger in Seamus's belly grew more acute, gnawing at his insides like a wild animal. He watched as neighbours began to sell off their livestock, sheep and cattle that had once grazed contentedly on the verdant hills, now reduced to a means of survival. The sounds of the countryside morphed from the cheerful bleats of sheep to the mournful lowing of cows, their fate sealed by the spectre of starvation. On the streets of Dublin, the situation was equally dire. The cobblestones, slick with rain, glistened underfoot as crowds gathered, their faces etched with despair. A group of activists, led by the indomitable Daniel O'Connell, sought to rally support for the plight of the Irish people. His voice rang out, powerful and resonant, calling for unity and action. "We must not allow our fellow countrymen to suffer in silence," he implored, his words reverberating against the cold stone walls of the city. "This is a time for change. This is a time for justice." But O'Connell's fervent pleas fell upon deaf ears. The British officials, ensconced in their grand offices, were more concerned with maintaining their political power than with the lives of the Irish people languishing in despair. The policies that emerged from Westminster were inadequate, a band-aid over a gaping wound. Relief efforts were slow to materialise, and when they did, they were often riddled with bureaucracy and inefficiency. The local officials, caught between the demands of the government and the cries of the starving, were left feeling powerless. As the summer waned, the air turned cooler and the first hints of autumn began to creep in. The leaves on the trees transformed from vibrant greens to hues of gold and amber, yet the beauty of the season felt like a cruel joke. For Seamus and his family, each day was a struggle. Finding enough to eat became a relentless battle. The pantry, once stocked with potatoes and bread, stood empty, the shelves echoing with a hollow silence. It was on a bleak afternoon, as the winds howled through the cracks in their cottage, that the news arrived. A messenger, breathless and wild-eyed, burst through the door. "The government, they are sending ships. Food will come to the ports." The words hung in the air, a fragile thread of hope. But there was a catch. The food wouldn't be distributed freely. It would come at a cost. The prices set by the government were exorbitant, beyond the reach of most. Seamus felt a bitter taste rise in his throat. The thought of his family starving while others profited from their suffering ignited a fire within him. He could see the desperation etched into the faces of his neighbours, each one a reflection of his own struggle. In a moment of clarity, he realised that this was not just a fight for food, this was a fight for dignity, for life itself. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and crimson, Seamus gathered with his fellow farmers once more. The air crackled with tension, and he could feel the weight of their collective suffering pressing down on their shoulders. "We cannot wait for the government to save us," he declared, his voice steady and resolute. "We must band together, share what little we have, and fight for our rights. We are not just victims, we are men and women of this land." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room, a growing sense of solidarity igniting their spirits. They began to strategize, pooling their resources, sharing food, and looking out for one another. The community, once fragmented by individual concerns, began to unite. Neighbors who had barely exchanged a word now stood shoulder to shoulder, sharing the weight of their burdens. But even as they rallied together, the crisis deepened. The first frost of autumn settled over the fields, its icy fingers creeping into the soil, sealing the fate of their crops. The once bountiful land, which had sustained generations, was now a wasteland. The chilling bite of hunger gnawed at the edges of their resolve, testing their strength as they fought to maintain hope against the overwhelming tide of despair. In the following months, as the frost lingered and the days grew shorter, news from the towns grew grimmer. The once bustling markets were now filled with empty stalls, and the sounds of laughter faded to whispers of mourning. The stench of decay filled the air, mingling with the cold, damp earth. Families were torn apart, the bonds of community fraying as survival instincts took hold. Seamus watched as friends and neighbours succumbed to illness and starvation, their bodies mere shadows of the vibrant souls they once were. Winter settled in with a cruel grip, blanketing the land in a layer of white. As the snow fell softly, covering the remains of the crops, the reality of their situation pierced through the frost. This was no longer just a crisis, it had become a catastrophe. The children, once filled with life and laughter, now moved like spectres through the cottage, their cheeks hollow and eyes sunken. Mary's hands, once strong and capable, trembled as she prepared meagre meals from the last remnants of their pantry. One dark evening, as the wind howled outside, a knock echoed through the cottage. Seamus opened the door to find a group of neighbours, their faces pale and stricken with fear. "There's been word. The government has made a decision," one man stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "They are not sending any more help. We are on our own." The words struck Seamus like a blow to the chest. He felt the heat rise within him, a fierce anger bubbling to the surface. How could they abandon the very people who had sustained their empire? How could they turn their backs on the cries of the hungry? The sense of injustice ignited a fire within him, a determination to stand up for his family, for his neighbours, for the entire nation. In the bitter cold of that winter, as the world outside froze in silence, a movement began to stir. Across the countryside, whispers of rebellion began to echo in the dark corners of cottages and taverns. Men and women, sick of waiting for a government that had turned its back on them, began to gather, sharing stories of loss and resilience. They spoke of a new Ireland, one that would rise from the ashes of despair, a land where the voices of the people would be heard. As the frost melted into the first signs of spring, hope began to flicker like a candle in the darkness. Seamus, standing among the remnants of his garden, felt the warmth of the sun on his face once more. It was not just the earth that was thawing, it was the spirit of the people, a collective yearning for change. The seeds of resistance were being sown, and in time they would bear fruit. But as the world around them began to awaken, the shadows of the past loomed large. The crisis had not yet reached its peak. The human cost was still mounting, and the hunger that gripped Ireland had only just begun to reveal its true face. The days stretched long and heavy, each one laden with the weight of uncertainty. And yet, in the depths of despair, the flicker of hope remained, a fragile thread connecting the hearts of the Irish people, binding them together as they faced the storm that loomed on the horizon. And just as Seamus took a deep breath, ready to face whatever came next, he felt a stirring within his soul, a whisper of resilience that refused to be silenced. The air in County Clare had begun to chill with the whisper of autumn, its breath a stark reminder of the season's inevitable change. The once vibrant greens of the landscape now bore a muted palette of browns and yellows, as if the very earth were mourning the loss of life it had nurtured just months before. The wind carried with it the scent of damp earth, mixed with the faintest tinge of decay, a harbinger of the hardships that lay ahead. Seamus O'Reilly stood at the threshold of his small cottage, his heart heavy with the weight of despair. The potato fields, once a proud testament to his labour, now lay in ruin, the ground cracked and barren as if it had forgotten how to yield sustenance. It had been a difficult summer, and as he watched the last of the green leaves succumb to rot, he could almost hear the sigh of his ancestors, echoing through the fields, lamenting the fate of their children. Inside, Mary moved quietly, her presence a soft comfort amidst the storm of worry that raged in Seamus's mind. The hearth flickered with a modest flame, its warmth battling against the encroaching chill, but it could not warm the icy grip of apprehension that had settled in his chest. He could feel it tightening, a vice of anxiety that threatened to crush him as he thought of the children. Little Patrick, with his curious eyes, and the twins, who had just begun to walk and explore the world around them. "Seamus," Mary's voice broke through his reverie, gentle yet laced with urgency. "We must think of what comes next." Her words hung in the air, a challenge and a plea. They had spoken of it so many times, how to survive this nightmare that had befallen them. But each conversation had felt like a step into the abyss, and now, as he gazed out at the skeletal remains of their crops, he was at a loss. The local officials had been gathering regularly, their meetings increasingly filled with panic and desperation. Seamus had attended the latest one, the dim light of the hall mingling with the smell of damp wood and sweat. The voices of his neighbours had filled the room, a cacophony of worry and despair. It was there that he had heard the whispers of emigration, of leaving everything behind in search of a better life across the ocean. But could he leave? The thought of abandoning the land that had fed his family for generations felt like a betrayal. Yet the alternative was stark, a future filled with hunger and suffering. He could still hear the local official's voice, the tremor in his words as he outlined the grim statistics. Death tolls rising, families torn apart, children starving. "Please, we must petition the government for assistance," the man had urged, desperation etched in every line of his face. "We cannot sit idle while our neighbours perish." Seamus had felt the weight of those words, the collective hope of the gathered men resting on his shoulders. But as he stood there, the flickering candlelight casting shadows against the walls, he couldn't shake the feeling that their pleas would fall on deaf ears. The government had already shown its indifference. Why would they act now? Days turned into weeks, and the situation grew more dire. The scent of decay lingered in the air, haunting him like a spectre. The fields, once lush with promise, now lay silent, their potential snuffed out by disease. He had ventured to Dublin with a handful of other men, their faces drawn and weary, to deliver their petition. But upon arriving at the grand buildings, he was met with the cold, unyielding stone of bureaucracy. "Your petition is noted," the clerk had said, without even looking up from his desk, "but there are many demands on our resources." The words stung like salt on an open wound. Seamus had returned home feeling more defeated than ever. He could no longer look his children in the eye without feeling the weight of his failure. As autumn deepened, the air grew heavier, filled with the sounds of the restless. The distant cries of crows echoed ominously, their black wings slicing through the grey sky. Each day, he watched as more families made the agonizing choice to leave, their belongings bundled on carts, faces set in grim determination. Some had taken to the sea, while others sought refuge in the towns, hoping for a scrap of food, a chance to survive. Seamus had clung to the hope that the government would finally respond, that relief would come in time to save them. But as the days dragged on, hope began to wither alongside the crops. Each morning, he would rise early, the chill of dawn biting at his skin, and walk through the fields, searching for any sign of life, any glimmer of sustenance. Yet, it was always the same, a landscape of defeat and despair. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the land, Seamus found himself sitting alone on a weathered stone, his heart heavy. He watched as Mary tended to the few meagre vegetables they had left, her hands gentle and steady, though her face betrayed the agony within. "Mary," he murmured, "what will we do?" She paused, her hands stilling in the dirt, and turned to him, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "We will endure, Seamus. We must find a way." But the way was growing dimmer with each passing day. The hunger gnawed at them, a constant reminder of their plight. The children had begun to grow thin, their laughter replaced by coughs and whispers of illness. The warmth that had once filled their home was now eclipsed by a cold hunger that seeped into their bones. As the first frost settled on the ground, the world shifted beneath Seamus's feet. The decision had become clearer, the path jagged and fraught with danger. He gathered his family close one night, the warmth of their bodies a small comfort against the chill, and spoke the words that had haunted him. "We may need to leave," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, each syllable heavy with uncertainty. Mary's breath hitched, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Leave? But where will we go?" "To America," he replied, the thought of the vast ocean both terrifying and exhilarating. "They say there's work, food, perhaps a chance to start anew." The children stirred, their innocence shining through the haze of worry. Little Patrick's eyes sparkled with curiosity, while the twins clung to their mother, sensing the gravity of the conversation. Mary looked at Seamus, her heart torn, yet she could see the determination in his gaze. "Then we will go," she said finally, her voice steady, though it trembled with the weight of their choice. "We will find a way." As they began to prepare for the journey, the packing of meagre belongings, the gathering of what little food remained, an air of urgency enveloped them. Each rustle of fabric, each whispered plan, seemed to echo against the walls of their cottage, a poignant farewell to the life they had known. The children clung to their parents, their small hands gripping tightly, fearing the unknown ahead. In the days that followed, the family joined the throngs of others making their way to the port. The streets buzzed with anticipation and fear, the air thick with the mingling scents of salt and sweat, the sound of carts creaking under the weight of dreams and despair. Seamus held Mary's hand tight, feeling the warmth of her skin against the chill, a lifeline through the tumult. As they boarded the ship, the reality of their choice struck Seamus like a cold wave. The vessel rocked gently, its hull creaking as it was prepared for departure. The stench of the sea mingled with the pungent odor of bodies pressed close together, a mass of hope and desperation. The captain's voice rang out, a harsh contrast to the quiet murmurs of fear and excitement that filled the air. "Prepare to set sail," he called, and with that, the ship began to pull away from the dock, the shoreline receding into a blur of memories. Seamus stood at the rail, watching the land that had cradled his family for generations slip away. The scent of salt water filled his lungs, the breeze tussling his hair as he turned to Mary, who stood beside him, her eyes reflecting the vastness of the ocean before them. "Do you think we'll find what we seek?" he asked, uncertainty lacing his voice. Mary leaned against the rail, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "We will find it together," she replied softly. "That is enough." As the ship sailed into the unknown, the enormity of their decision loomed like a storm on the horizon. Yet amidst the fear, a flicker of hope ignited within Seamus's heart. They were alive, together, and the journey ahead, though fraught with peril, was theirs to navigate. The months that followed were a blur of turmoil and hardship. The ship creaked and groaned under the weight of its passengers, the air thick with the smell of sweat and sickness. As they crossed the Atlantic, the reality of their choice bore down on them, each day a test of endurance. Yet with every sunrise, Seamus found strength in the faces of Mary and the children, their resolve a steady flame against the encroaching darkness. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the ship approached the shores of America. The sight of land, a jagged line against the horizon, sent a surge of anticipation through Seamus's veins. The cries of the crew filled the air, mingling with the sound of waves crashing against the hull, a symphony of possibility. As they disembarked, the scent of the unfamiliar land enveloped them, fresh, vibrant, and alive with the promise of new beginnings. Seamus took a deep breath, his heart racing with hope and fear. They were finally here, standing on the precipice of a future untold. But even as the sun shone brightly overhead, illuminating the faces of those around them, Seamus could not shake the shadows of the past. The memories of loss, the faces of those left behind, haunted him like ghosts, whispering reminders of the struggle they had endured. Yet amidst the uncertainty, there was a flicker of determination in his heart. They would build a new life, forge a path through the challenges that lay ahead. For every hardship faced, every sacrifice made, they had gained a chance to rise from the ashes of despair and create something beautiful. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the land, Seamus gathered his family close. He could feel the warmth of their bodies against the cooling air, a testament to their unity and strength. Together, they would face whatever came next, their hearts intertwined by the journey they had undertaken. And so, with the horizon stretching before them, a tapestry of hope and resilience woven into every thread of their existence, they stepped forward into the unknown, ready to embrace the future. In the quiet of the night, as the stars began to twinkle overhead like a blanket of dreams, Seamus whispered a silent prayer to the ancestors who had guided him thus far. He felt the weight of their love surrounding him, the legacy of survival etched in every fibre of his being. And in that moment, he understood, no matter where the journey took them, the spirit of their home would always remain, a guiding light through the darkest of nights. The promise of a new dawn lay ahead, and together they would rise. The sun began to rise over County Clare, casting a pale golden glow across the fields that once flourished with green. The day felt heavy, saturated with the echoes of loss and lament. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay, a reminder of what had been, a tapestry of life now frayed and threadbare. As the first light broke, Seamus O'Reilly stood at the threshold of his cottage, his heart a lead weight in his chest. the silence was palpable. Where laughter had once danced in the air, now only the soft rustle of dead leaves remained. The potato plants, once lush and vibrant, now lay wilted and blackened, their roots rotting in the soil that had betrayed them. It was a graveyard of hope, a stark testament to the ravages of the blight that had come like a thief in the night, stealing away the very sustenance of life. Seamus could feel the chill of the morning air seep into his bones. He wrapped his arms around himself, as if to shield his heart from the cold truth that had settled over his family. Mary stood beside him, her eyes reflecting a sorrow that seemed to stretch beyond the horizon. The children, Patrick and the twins, were still asleep, oblivious to the grim reality that had unfolded during the night. They had been spared the worst of it, but how long could they remain untouched by the shadow that loomed over their lives? As the days turned into weeks, the reality of the aftermath began to take shape. The local community, once bustling with the sounds of daily life, the clattering of horses' hooves on cobblestone, the cheerful calls of vendors, was now marked by an eerie stillness. Families who had lived together for generations found themselves divided, some having succumbed to sickness and starvation, while others sought refuge in distant lands, lured by the hope of survival. Seamus recalled the faces of his neighbours, John and Margaret, who had shared laughter over pints in the local pub, now mere memories. Their cottage stood empty, its door creaking in the wind, like a ghostly reminder of the lives that had been lost. He could almost hear Margaret's lilting voice calling to her children, the warmth of her laughter mingling with the aroma of fresh bread baking in the hearth. But that warmth had been extinguished, leaving behind a chilling void. The local meeting hall, once a vibrant hub of discussions and planning, now felt like a hollow shell. Seamus found himself there more often than not, sitting among the few remaining souls who dared to gather. The discussions had shifted from plans of petitioning the government for assistance to somber exchanges of who was left, who had gone, and who had fallen ill. Each name weighed heavily on the hearts of those gathered. Each story a thread pulled from the fabric of their community. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an orange glow that flickered through the cracks in the hall, Seamus listened to the murmurs around him. There was talk of food relief efforts, but as the words hung in the air, they felt like echoes of a promise long forgotten. The government's response had been slow, bureaucratic, a distant echo of concern that failed to resonate with the desperation they faced. Charles Trevelyan's name surfaced often in the conversations, a man whose decisions felt like a heavy yoke upon their shoulders. The Assistant Secretary to the Treasury, who had overseen the relief efforts, was viewed with a mixture of frustration and helplessness. His refusal to acknowledge the gravity of the crisis only deepened the chasm between the Irish people and their rulers. The idea that relief would come through the poor law, a system that demanded payment for assistance, felt like an insult to those who had lost everything. As the weeks passed, the community began to fracture under the strain of survival. Some families banded together, forming makeshift cooperatives to share what little food they could muster, while others chose isolation, fearing that their hunger might lead them to desperate acts against their neighbours. The tension hung in the air like a thundercloud, ready to unleash its fury at any moment. Seamus often returned home to Mary with a heart laden with the weight of it all. The children, sensing the change in their parents, grew quieter, their laughter fading like the last rays of sunlight. They would huddle together, sharing stories of happier times, their small faces illuminated by the flickering light of the hearth. Seamus watched them, his heart aching with a fierce longing to shield them from the harsh reality outside their door. "Perhaps we should leave," Mary whispered one evening, her voice barely above a breath, as they sat at the table, the remnants of their meagre supper lingering on the plates. The idea hung in the air, potent and terrifying. Emigration, an escape from the land that had been their home, the land that now turned against them. Seamus felt a shiver run down his spine. The thought of leaving the soil that cradled their ancestors felt like a betrayal. Yet, the spectre of starvation loomed larger each day. He could not bear the thought of watching his children suffer. "Where would we go?" he asked, his voice heavy with uncertainty. Mary's gaze drifted to the window, where the cold wind rattled the shutters. "I've heard of ships leaving for America, for Canada. There is talk of land, of new beginnings." New beginnings. The words held both promise and peril. The thought of crossing the ocean, of leaving everything behind, filled Seamus with a mixture of dread and hope. He could imagine the distant shores where opportunity beckoned, yet he also saw the darkness of uncertainty lurking on the horizon. Days melded into weeks, and each day brought its own challenges. The local market, once alive with chatter and the vibrant colours of produce, had dwindled to a mere shadow of its former self. The air was thick with the stench of desperation, and the few stalls that remained offered only the barest of sustenance, rotten vegetables and stale bread. One afternoon, as Seamus wandered through the market, he encountered a familiar face, Patrick Mulligan, a once robust farmer whose frame now seemed to wither under the weight of hunger. "Seamus," he rasped, his voice hoarse, "have you seen the others?" Seamus shook his head, his heart heavy. "Not since the last meeting. It's hard to find them." Patrick's eyes, once bright with life, now held a dull sheen of resignation. "They say some have taken to the road, seeking relief in the cities. Others—" His voice trailed off, a shadow passing over his features. Seamus felt a knot form in his stomach. The thought of his neighbours, once so vital and present, now reduced to whispers and rumours, unsettled him. "And what of your family?" he inquired gently. Patrick's shoulders slumped. "We've lost so much. My wife, she fell ill last week. The children, they're hungry, Seamus. I don't know how much longer we can last." The despair in Patrick's voice echoed in Seamus's mind, a haunting reminder of the fragility of life. The world outside felt unrelenting, a harsh landscape where hope flickered like a dying flame. As autumn descended, the chill in the air became a physical presence, wrapping itself around the hearts of those who remained. The nights grew longer, and the cold seeped into the very bones of the cottage, forcing Seamus and Mary to huddle together beneath threadbare blankets, their bodies seeking warmth against the encroaching despair. One evening, as the wind howled outside, Mary brought forth a tattered book, its pages yellowed and frayed. "It's the stories of our people," she whispered, her voice a gentle caress against the backdrop of the storm. "Perhaps we can find solace in remembering." Seamus watched as she opened the book, the light of the candle flickering against the walls, casting shadows that danced like the ghosts of their ancestors. Mary began to read aloud, her voice steady and soothing. The tales of resilience and courage filled the room, wrapping around them like a warm embrace. They spoke of struggles and triumphs, of the strength that lay within the hearts of their kin. As Mary's voice wove its magic, Seamus found himself drawn into the stories, each word a thread connecting him to a lineage that had faced its own trials. The warmth of their shared history seeped into the cracks of his despair, momentarily pushing back the shadows that threatened to engulf them. But as the stories faded into the stillness of the night, reality crept back in, relentless and cold. The famine had not subsided. It had only deepened its roots, entwining itself around the very essence of their existence. The word emigration lingered like a spectre, haunting the edges of their thoughts, a whisper of possibility mixed with fear. Weeks turned into months, and the frost of winter settled in, a cruel reminder of the harshness that lay outside the warmth of their cottage. The local community, once vibrant and thriving, continued to dwindle. The laughter of children had given way to silence, and the streets that had echoed with life were now filled with an unsettling quiet. Seamus found himself drawn to the meeting hall, more out of a sense of duty than hope. The conversations had shifted from pleas for assistance to discussions of survival strategies, how to gather what little food remained, how to care for the ill, and how to support those who had chosen to leave. It was in one such meeting that a decision was made, an agreement to form a group to support those who wished to emigrate. The room buzzed with a mix of excitement and trepidation. The idea of leaving their homeland was both a glimmer of hope and a heart-wrenching farewell. As Seamus listened, he felt the weight of his own indecision. The thought of departing from the land that had cradled his ancestors felt like a betrayal, yet the prospect of watching his children wither away was a fate he could not bear. That evening, as the wind howled outside, Seamus and Mary sat together, their hands entwined on the table. "What if we left?" Mary asked, her voice barely above a whisper, the words hanging in the air like a fragile thread. Seamus felt his heart race. "You mean to go to America?" Mary nodded, her gaze steady. "I've heard stories of families who have found a new life there. Perhaps we could find a way to survive." The thought of America, a land of promise and opportunity, sparked a flicker of hope within Seamus. Yet, he could not shake the sadness that accompanied it. "But what of our home, Mary? What of the land?" Mary squeezed his hand. "The land will always be a part of us, but we must think of our children. They deserve a chance." Days turned into weeks, and the decision loomed larger. Each time Seamus looked at Patrick and the twins, he felt the weight of the world pressing down on him. The thought of leaving was both a burden and a solace, a duality that threatened to unravel him. Finally, as the frost of winter began to thaw, Seamus made the choice. They would leave, not just for themselves, but for the children who deserved a future unclouded by despair. The day they decided to depart felt like a bittersweet farewell to everything they had ever known. As they packed their meager belongings, the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and the bittersweet taste of nostalgia. Each item they folded into their tattered bags felt like a small piece of their history, a moment captured in time. Seamus felt the weight of their choices pressing against his chest, an anchor tethering him to the past. On the morning of their departure, the sun broke through the clouds, casting a soft light over the fields that had once cradled their dreams. Seamus stood at the threshold of their cottage one last time, the cool breeze brushing against his skin. He closed his eyes, inhaling deeply, committing every scent, every sound to memory. The laughter of the children echoed in his mind. The warmth of Mary's embrace lingered in his heart. He took one last glance at the potato fields, the very earth that had nourished his family, and with it he whispered a silent promise. "We will carry you with us." As they set foot on the path that would lead them to the unknown, the air was filled with a mixture of trepidation and hope. The road stretched before them, winding through the hills and valleys, each step echoing the heartbeat of their shared resolve. With each passing moment, the world they left behind faded into a memory. But the stories of their ancestors, the resilience, the strength, remained woven into the fabric of their being. The journey ahead was uncertain, but they would face it together. And so, as they walked toward the horizon, the weight of loss began to feel lighter, the promise of a new beginning shimmering like the first light of dawn. They ventured forth, ready to embrace whatever awaited them beyond the shores of their homeland, a family bound not just by blood, but by the indomitable spirit that refused to be extinguished. In the weeks and months that followed, the legacy of the Great Irish Famine would echo across oceans, as countless others embarked on similar journeys, leaving behind the memories of what had been, and carrying with them the hope of what could be. The land they left would remain forever etched in their hearts, a bittersweet reminder of resilience born from suffering, and a testament to the enduring spirit of a people who, even in the face of despair, dared to dream of a brighter tomorrow. And in the stillness of the night, as the stars twinkled overhead, the stories of Seamus O'Reilly and his family would join the chorus of countless others, the echoes of their struggles and triumphs weaving through time, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope can blossom anew. As the years unfolded after the harrowing darkness of the Great Irish Famine, the echoes of that time began to reverberate through the valleys and hills of Ireland. The landscape, once teeming with vibrant green fields of potatoes, now bore the scars of loss, the memories of what had been haunting its very soil. The famine, a period of unimaginable suffering, had altered the course of a nation, and its legacy would ripple through generations, shaping the identity of Ireland and its people in profound ways. In the quiet corners of County Clare, where Seamus O'Reilly had once tilled the earth, whispers of remembrance lingered in the air. Families gathered to recount stories of their ancestors, tales woven with threads of sorrow and resilience. "Do you remember the stories of our great-grandmother?" A voice might rise amidst the crackling firewood as the scent of damp earth and burning peat filled the room. How she fought to keep her children alive, how they walked for days in search of food. Each retelling was a testament to survival, a way of keeping the spirit of those who had been lost alive. Yet, as the decades turned into centuries, the narrative began to shift. The famine was not merely a historical event. It transformed into a symbol of suffering, a cornerstone of Irish nationalism. It served as a stark reminder of the struggles against oppression, the fight for autonomy from British rule. Daniel O'Connell's words, once a call for emancipation, became a rallying cry for a nation yearning to reclaim its dignity. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the famine was invoked in the halls of power, where leaders spoke of justice and rights, fueling the flames of rebellion in the hearts of many. The memory of the famine morphed into a potent mythos, a narrative that emphasized the resilience of the Irish spirit. In the wake of the famine, emigration surged, with countless souls seeking new beginnings across the seas. The Irish diaspora flourished, and stories of the famine crossed oceans, reaching the shores of America, Canada, and beyond. In the bustling cities of Boston and New York, the scent of soda bread and the sound of fiddles mixed with the wailing of the past, forging a new identity for those who had left their homeland. They carried their stories with them, a silent vow to never forget, to ensure that the sacrifices made during those dark years would not be in vain. The famine became a lesson etched into the consciousness of the Irish people. It fostered a fierce sense of community, emphasizing the importance of caring for one another. In the years following the tragedy, organizations dedicated to helping the vulnerable emerged, driven by the collective trauma of shared history. The spirit of charity bloomed, as people remembered the faces of those who had perished, and the warmth of shared bread became a symbol of solidarity. Festivals celebrating Irish heritage began to flourish, where the air was sweet with the scent of baked goods, and laughter rang out like music, a defiance against the shadows of the past. Yet, as the legacy of the famine evolved, the complexities of its memory began to surface. A darker narrative emerged, one that accused the British government of negligence, of allowing the misery to unfold unchecked. The term genocide began to surface in discussions as historians and activists sought to reframe the story, to highlight the systemic failures that exacerbated the tragedy. The debates raged on, with some arguing for reparations, others demanding acknowledgement of the suffering endured. The famine, once a singular moment in time, now became a battleground for political discourse, a symbol of historical injustice that could not be ignored. In the 20th century, the events of the famine were immortalized in art, literature, and song. Poets like W.B. Yeats and playwrights like Samuel Beckett drew upon the pain and resilience of their ancestors, weaving tales that spoke to the heart of the Irish experience. The haunting refrain of traditional Irish songs echoed through pubs and homes, carrying the weight of memory, a reminder of what had been lost. The images of starving children, of desperate mothers searching for sustenance, became iconic, forever etched in the collective psyche of the nation. These artistic expressions became vessels for grief, allowing the weight of the past to be shared and understood, turning sorrow into a rallying cry for justice. As the years advanced, the legacy of the famine continued to shape the political landscape of Ireland. The rise of the Irish Free State in the early 20th century was deeply intertwined with the memories of the past. The desire for self-governance and the quest for equality were fueled by the haunting spectres of those who had suffered. The famine became a reference point for understanding the struggles of the present, a reminder that history is never far behind. The echoes of desperation became a call to action, a demand for a better future, as leaders emerged who were determined to create a society that would not repeat the mistakes of the past. In recent decades, the Great Irish Famine has entered a new phase of commemoration. The establishment of memorials and museums dedicated to the famine serves as both a tribute and a reminder. The air is often heavy with incense and flowers as people gather to honour the lost. The soft rustle of leaves and the gentle murmur of voices create a sacred space where grief and remembrance intertwine. In Dublin, the haunting eyes of the Famine Memorial stand as a powerful testament to the pain endured, while the voices of survivors echo through the halls of the National Museum of Ireland, where artefacts speak to the resilience and strength of a people who refused to be silenced. But with remembrance comes the burden of reflection. As the descendants of those who lived through the famine look back, they grapple with the complexities of their heritage. The weight of history is palpable, and the stories of survival, loss, and resilience become intertwined with a sense of responsibility. The question arises, how do we honor the past while forging a path toward the future? The legacy of the famine is not merely a story of survival, it is a call to ensure that such suffering is never repeated. As the world has changed, so too has the understanding of the famine's impact. It serves as a cautionary tale, a reminder of the fragility of life and the interconnectedness of humanity. Global crises, whether they be environmental, political, or social, resonate with the lessons learned from that dark period. The famine urges us to act with compassion, to recognize the plight of those who suffer, and to respond with empathy and understanding. The shadows of history are long, but they can guide us toward a more just and equitable future. And so, as the sun sets over County Clare, casting a warm golden hue across the fields, the stories of the Great Irish Famine continue to unfold. They intertwine with the laughter of children playing in the meadows, the soft hum of conversations in the local pub, and the rhythm of life that persists despite the weight of the past. The legacy of the famine is not merely a tale of sorrow. It is woven into the very fabric of Irish identity, a testament to the resilience of a people who have endured and thrived against all odds. In the hearts of those who remember, the famine is more than a chapter in a history book. It is a living narrative that transcends time. It reminds us of the fragility of life, the strength of community, and the enduring power of hope. As the stars twinkle above the Irish landscape, they watch over the stories that have been told and those yet to be shared, a comforting reminder that even amidst darkness, light can emerge. The legacy of the Great Irish Famine is a beacon, guiding future generations toward a path of compassion, understanding, and resilience, a promise that the past will never be forgotten, and that from the ashes of despair, a brighter future can blossom. As the night deepens and the world slips into slumber, we hold these stories close, cherishing the lessons learned from those who faced unimaginable hardships. The echoes of the famine linger in the cool night air, reminding us that we are not simply the products of our history, we are its keepers, its storytellers, and its guardians. In every whispered tale, every remembered name, lies the spirit of survival, a legacy that will forever shape the heart of Ireland and resonate far beyond its shores. And so, we carry these stories, allowing them to guide us as we forge our own paths, ensuring that the sacrifices of the past illuminate our journey toward a future filled with hope and possibility. As the shadows lengthened and the night deepened, a hush fell over the land, wrapping it in a blanket of stars. In the quiet corners of County Clare, the remnants of a once vibrant culture lingered in the air. The echoes of laughter and the warmth of shared meals had been replaced by a somber stillness, a reminder of the lives altered forever by the Great Irish